You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always. This week we have a massive industry heavy hitter in the room. It is Tanya Steinbeck, CEO of UDIA WA. We're very lucky to have her in. We've had Fen O'Brien, who's on the Outlook Committee a few months ago. Absolute trailblazer in the industry. And now we've got the top dog herself, Tanya. Thank you very much for coming in.
Oh, no, you're welcome, Trent. It's a great opportunity.
I reckon we could have a 2-hour podcast here, but we don't have the time for that. There's so many things that we could talk about when it comes to not only your life story, UDIA in terms of what you guys do every day, but geez, what an industry we have and what a time we live in when it comes to development in Perth.
Oh, absolutely. It's unprecedented, really, what we're experiencing on so many levels. Look, I think it's an exciting time. With great change comes great opportunity, and I think that's how we've got to view the challenges that we've got at the moment.
That's right. I think the famous saying, or the one that I try to stick to, is with chaos is opportunity, right?
Yes.
And it isn't, if there was ever an example of chaos, it's been the last couple of years in Perth, development and planning.
Oh, yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Let's talk about you for a minute if we can. This is a very good opportunity to really lay down a bit of a trail for others to blaze that you have run over the last couple of decades in your career, because you are a shining light in this industry of one of the very few females who are absolutely at the top of their game in this space. It's way too underrepresented. There should be 10 more Tanya Steinbecks, I think, in Perth. And there's only a couple of you, and in terms of women leading in this industry. And I think it'd be really important to, if you don't mind, share a bit of your story as to how it got from Tanya the grad or Tanya coming out of high school to where you're at the top of your game today.
So I guess I follow probably not the traditional pathway to where I am at the moment. I refer to myself as a high school dropout. When I was in high school, I had great intentions. I had 2 career options. One was law and the other was psychology. And I was 100% committed. That was what I was going to do. And as I sort of progressed through year 11, entered into the early parts of year 12, the opportunity to leave school and get a paying job was far more appealing to me at the time than sitting in a classroom. Whilst I never did badly academically, it just wasn't my thing. So I had the opportunity to go into the workforce and worked for Challengworth Motors, which...
what a topical place it is these days.
I know, and full circle now from a development perspective. But that was my first full-time job out of school, and I worked for Kim Ledger. This is my claim to fame. This is Heath Ledger's father, when he was working in the Challengworth service department. And I was the receptionist. It was my first job out of school, and what a place to kick off your journey into being a responsible employee, I suppose.
You would have seen some pretty interesting people walk through that door on Sterling Highway.
Yeah. And really, I think working in an environment like that with the clientele that they had forced me to mature very quickly, because I was dealing with people that have a lot of money, professionals, and I was forced to, I guess, behave in a way that was...
Step up.
Yeah, I had to step up. And so that was a really interesting and fun time. The opportunity came up to work for the Property Council.
And how old were you at this point?
17.
Yeah.
I was 17, and Joe Lenzo, who is still worked with today still walking around with the Property Education Foundation, he hired me as a fresh-faced 17-year-old, and at that stage there was only 3 staff at PCA, and they had probably not that long ago transitioned from being the Building Owners and Managers Association, the old BOMA, to Property Council. And that really was, I would say, my time to shine, in the sense that I had Joe's support, and we grew from 3 staff to 7 or 8 by the time I left 7 years later. And I started as executive assistant to Joe and supporting events and other bits and pieces, and then after 7 years ended up business manager, running all the commercial functions and bits and pieces.
24 years old, that's a pretty big job.
At 24, yeah, it was huge. I absolutely loved it. I loved the network, the people that I met through that industry, and I I still believe to this day that working for an industry body like that, from a career perspective, opens so many doors because you just build an enormous network.
Well, yeah, there's some very powerful people in property. In the 90s, was it a boys' club in property in that space, in that representation?
Oh, very much so.
So that's the thing. Not only are you battling that on a daily basis, but you're also still 24 years old.
Yeah. And I was very conscious at the time that I didn't have that academic piece of paper.
That pedigree, yeah.
And so I went to Curtin University, got a grad certificate in marketing because at the time that was what I was most interested in, and I'm a highly creative person, so that appealed to me. So did that whilst I was working full time, just so I had a piece of paper.
Sort of what it is for a lot of people, isn't it?
Well, that's what it felt like to me.
Was it more of a self-validation? I'm assuming not many people were asking you, where's your high school diploma or where's your bachelor at that point in time? You're 24, everyone just moves on. But was it something that you and yourself had to tick the box?
I felt like for me to be able to progress from a career perspective, I needed to show or demonstrate that I could, in fact, go and get an academic qualification if I chose to.
Yep.
And out of curiosity, really, I wanted to understand what the benefits were of going to university and what it was like to have that more theoretical knowledge behind the practical experience that I had.
That formal education.
Formal education piece. And look, I enjoyed it. Do I think that it really changed the way I operated in my role, which at the time was marketing? No.
Yep.
I think
But that's, I think, the case for most people, isn't it?
Yeah, I went through the experience, and that was just for me. Got the 7-year itch, I think. I'd been there 7 years, and I had mentioned to one of our members that I was looking to apply for a role in local government and was asking for a reference. That particular person said, "Oh God, what on earth would you want to go and work for local government for?"
Well, that's what I would say, to be honest. But anyway,
and I said,
please do tell.
Okay. Well, what do you think? So then that person offered me a job, and I ended up going and working for Stockland for 4 years as a project marketing manager, and that was fantastic. Great experience working for a listed company and having some great projects. At the time, it was boom time in property.
So what estates were you working on at that point?
Back then it was Ashdale Gardens, which was in Dart.
Yeah.
And
that's actually the first place I bought my first property as well when I was 19.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Yep.
So, Ashdale Gardens, the Boardwalk in Southern River, South Beach, North Coogee, and also worked on a tender which Stockland eventually won on what back then was referred to Brookdale, but is now the Wollongong precinct.
What do you learn in this time at Stockland? I mean,
what do I learn?
Anyone who can sell vacant land on scale, en masse, has done their own degree.
Really interesting because at that time it was a boom. So we didn't have to market. We didn't have to spend a cent, basically, because blocks were just walking out the door. So this was the time where there were camp outs, all of that sort of thing. So effectively we had to manage disappointment to a large degree because that's what it was.
There's a little bit of customer service coming
back. A little bit,
yeah.
And so we had to look at ways of how we managed the excessive demand in a way that we thought was more appropriate than getting people to camp out, which we just didn't feel was right for Stockland. So we ended up using a call centre, and literally down to the second it was, it opens at 9 a.m, first in, best dressed, and we will literally allocate lots on that basis.
Like you're a radio station giving away prizes.
It was. Yeah. It felt like that. And so that was the case in terms of our trading estates that I was working on. The biggest challenge and the biggest learning for me was working on South Beach. At the time, there was a lot of controversy around developing that site. There was a particular action group called Save South Beach, which was headed up at the time by Adele Carles, who had political aspirations and hadn't yet realised those. She would go on to obviously become a member for the Greens moving further down the track. But we were constantly on the front page of the local community papers, not in a good way. There were a lot of concerns because that site was contaminated, that it needed to be remediated, a lot of environmental considerations and community consultation requirements and other things like that. So it really took a different approach to be able to get through that, to get through the approvals process and get on site. I guess when we first kicked off that project, we had a little bit of a combative approach, I guess, or defensive approach, particularly in the media, which just fueled the fire.
Yep.
And so I wrote a community consultation strategy, and we just opened everything up. We invited all of the sort of the key players in terms of the local community and the local council that were most concerned, and we brought them in on site. In the site office, we had our environmental consultants.
Transparency.
We had absolutely everyone, and we sat down and we let them vent and we let them tell us what they were most worried about. We had all of our consultants talk to them and explain to them how it would operate and get a better understanding of what the implications would be, particularly around air quality monitoring, which was a big issue because of obviously got the Fremantle doctor coming in over that site, potentially blowing some contaminated material over the residential area. And I would say within the first two community meetings we had, all of the concern that was being driven through the media died down to almost nothing. And it was because we were open and transparent.
On the front foot. Some people just want to be heard.
Well, absolutely. Which I totally understand. So I guess that was one of my greatest learnings was around being open and transparent and not trying to put things under the carpet and try and pretend that a situation is something that it isn't.
Yeah, try and bulldoze your way through.
Yeah. And look, to this day, we had a lot of challenges on that site to get it to where it was. I was at the launch, and this was probably just as the boom was coming off. Price point was anywhere from $1 to $6-7 million per apartment, and we sold the vast majority off the plan on that night at the Fremantle Sailing Club. It was phenomenal.
Wow.
And I guess that was indicative at the time of the market and how hot it was. So the time at Stockland, it was a fantastic experience, great group of people, good to work for a listed company that has a lot of structure, a lot of opportunity within it. I worked there until I got pregnant with my first child and went on mat leave.
Yep.
3 months later, was bored being at home and had to do something. So I wanted to come back part-time, but unfortunately at the time there wasn't those opportunities at Stockies.
Much less flexible than these days.
Yeah, much less flexible back then, not the case now. So I left and sort of just started consulting back to Stockland, ironically, and, other organisations. I studied coaching, executive coaching, social emotional intelligence. That spoke to my interest in psychology.
This is a big move here, right? So you've sort of papered over or something there where, you've had a kid.
Yep.
That's great. But gone from working a PAYG job in a massive listed company and then overnight gone, hang on, I've now got the confidence, I've now got the opportunity to essentially be my own brand and consult back, start coaching, start adding value from a self-employed perspective. That thing that you just papered over in 10 seconds takes people years to get their head around and get the confidence to do. Was that something that just happened overnight for you, or were you thinking about that for quite a few years?
No, I didn't think about that for quite a few years. And I guess this is one of the things with me is I can be quite impulsive. I'm highly driven, and I suffer from bright, shiny thing syndrome, as my team know well now, in that I'll have 1,000 ideas and I don't often think things through to the extent that I should sometimes. And so I just jumped straight in. I looked at it and went, what's
the worst that could happen?
What's the worst that can happen? I was meant to take 12 months off mat leave anyway, so I can work from home, look after baby.
I do say action is 80% of success.
Yeah, so I thought, well, why not? Exactly, what's the worst that can happen? And in the end, thoroughly enjoyed the coaching side of things, did a lot of consulting and coaching to small businesses, mainly around the sales and marketing side of things, where they don't have, I guess, the resources to be able to hire a marketing manager in-house, but they really need somebody to come in and sort of look at the business in its entirety. And I worked mainly with smaller businesses with owners who were stuck being, I guess, operators of the business, but just wanted to own the business.
Well, I'm assuming a lot of these businesses, their skill set probably lies more in the planning, the development, the engineering side, but maybe you don't have the skills to sell And that's a lot of businesses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't just in the property arena either. It was other organisations. There was mobile windscreens and tree farm and, it was random
businesses that are probably built on the technical prowess.
Exactly.
But then don't know how to represent themselves or optimise the product that they've created.
Yeah, and to also, I guess, get the business set up from a systems and a process perspective so that they have the confidence that it can operate without them having to be there. And that was a game changer for the owners that I worked with. Was they didn't want to have to be in the business. They wanted to be able to take holidays. They wanted to be able to take time away and know with confidence that the business was going to be fine without them being there.
I guess there's still a gap here.
So the next step, it ended up becoming probably too much to be able to manage, and I got pregnant with my second child during this period, and I ended up doing some work for Mirvac in the marketing space on a project called Karratha City of the North, which was a joint venture project with the state government, which was Landcorp back then.
Was this when Evan Campbell was CEO?
Yes, and so we had Evan, Kim Lawrence, Dean Mudford. They were all sort of, the senior guys at Mirvac at the time, and so I was just consulting to them at that point, and their need grew beyond, I guess, what my current sort of engagement with them was. And so I made a decision to work for Mirvac exclusively back in a project marketing role, which was fantastic. So to be able to work on a project like Karratha City of the North, and that was part of the Pilbara City's focus back then by the previous government.
Still stands out as the biggest building
in
Karratha, right?
Yeah, it does. That was a fantastic opportunity to work in the region like that, and on some other really exciting projects that are, really amazing legacies today, like the Peninsula project in Burswood and Leighton Beach. So that was great. Did that for a couple of years, and I guess I got to the point where I felt like I wanted to make a difference. I sort of turned 30, which to me that was a big milestone for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, just giving that point there for the involvement and the experience that you have built, that intellectual capital you've built by the age of 30. I'm looking forward to the next few years. Here we go.
Yeah, here we go. I'll try and do it quickly. Turned 30, third of a life crisis, midlife crisis almost, I suppose. Had my kids and just thought I really want to be able to give back, and a role came up with the Department of Housing, or Housing Authority at the time, and I thought I could add a lot of value in that space by bringing in, I guess, more of a commercial background, and from a marketing perspective, looking at the challenge of the poor perception of public housing and how you could try and shift those perceptions to the benefit of the people that, the government looks after. Did the interview process, which I thought publicly listed recruitment processes were complicated. Try applying for a public sector role. That was challenging.
The back and forth, the time it takes.
Oh, yeah.
The criteria, the KPIs, all that stuff. I envy no one involved in the public sector recruitment process.
So, that in itself was a learning exercise, but was successful in getting that role. So went in as a manager of strategic communications branch in housing. And basically back then, the Housing Authority was looking to better position themselves as, I guess, and at the time they were the state's biggest land developer, over and above anyone in the private sector.
Right?
Yeah, and they had the unique opportunity where they had the levers that they could pull around delivering social and affordable housing across the continuum. And so for them, it was about really positioning Housing Authority as a key policy player in the delivery of social and affordable housing rather than just a landlord, which is basically what it was. So this was in 2014.
So the dichotomy between what you've just said then in terms of the strategy and what you were delivering and where it is 8 years later.
Oh, yeah.
We'll get to that.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved that role. I had a great team and worked on what we called our opening doors, the shared equity campaigns, things like that. A lot of messaging, a lot of strategic messaging. And I guess what I valued there was the corporate executive really valued communication and making sure you get your messaging right and your narrative right and the authenticity behind that.
I think it's a great idea. Market leader, you've just seen Albanese push a national policy that essentially copies this policy, right, in terms of shared equity style schemes. And there's a lot of these places where West Australia's been doing this for years.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think the only downside, and again, we can get to it soon, is that we just haven't done enough of it. We haven't delivered enough of it.
Yeah. And look, the challenge, I think, back then was that there were differing views around whether or not the state government should be that heavily involved in terms of particularly the delivery of affordable housing.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, I did that role. So I was there at Housing for 4 years, and I would have done the role I was recruited for about 12 months. Then I acted in a role as the director of the Social Housing Investment Package, which we called SHIP back then. It's called SHIRP now. They love their acronyms.
Yeah.
Went on to take on that director position and deliver the SHIP program, which was, at the time, it was the biggest investment in social housing, $560 million project to deliver 1,000 new social houses, which was a mix of building 600, spot purchasing 200, and affordable private rental pilot, which was the balance of the 1,000. And we had 2 years to do it. It was incredibly challenging. We obviously didn't have the constraints that we have today around construction labour. Yeah. But for me, that role required me to work across the entire agency. And one of the greatest disconnects, I think, within big agencies like that was the disconnect between the service delivery component, which is those people that interface with the clients and match, the social housing need to the appropriate property, and the actual commercial component of the business, which was the development component.
It's always at loggerheads with itself, right? Because at the end of the day,
it's challenging.
There should be a mission statement that encompasses and sits on top of all other criteria, and that is simply to deliver. Yeah. Regardless of the commerciality of it, because it is a long-term development. Whether it's not commercial now, it will be commercial in 20 years' time.
Yes,
right?
Yep.
So that brings you to 2018?
Yeah, and then UDIA job came up, and I thought, well, that's a reasonably good opportunity for me, given my work with the Property Council, having worked in an industry body, understand how that works, already know the vast majority of people in the industry, but also understanding the political and government lens, which is particularly important in a role like the one that I'm doing now.
And the marketing and comms
and the
experience and qualifications you've got.
Yeah, this opportunity came up, and I was really, really fortunate to get the gig. So I'll be 4 years now in this job in November.
It's amazing how, and I can do the same thing with my career, so many people when they look back, not at any point in time when you were 20 or 24 do I reckon you had an idea about this is where I'm going to be heading, this is where I'm going to end up, I'm planning that one day I will be in a role like that, right? But when you look back, you can piece all the little puzzle pieces together and go, yep, that gave me that experience, that gave me those connections, that gave me that qualification, this is my interests. Put that all together and, well, geez, I am the perfect fit for this job. Isn't it funny how life works that way?
Yeah, it is. I felt that when the position came up. It did take a lot for me to leave the public sector, because within the public sector, as challenging as it can be, there are so many career opportunities. It's so diverse that I could have been a public sector employee forever, but thought, no, look, this is a really good opportunity. I'm very creative and I like the entrepreneurial sort of approach and having complete control over my own destiny, and in particular from a work context, which is very difficult when you work in the public sector.
Let's segue to UDIA. From your point of view, what is the mission statement of UDIA? Why do you exist?
Our vision, I guess, is to create and regenerate sustainable communities for the benefit of Western Australians or Australians more broadly. So I refer to UDIA as representing, we are the community creators. Our
industry body.
Yeah, we're the member. Our members are the people that create communities in all of its forms. We have a very broad-based membership. So yes, we exist to represent the developers. From our inception, which was basically a group of land developers that came together out of frustration of dealing with government agencies, and funny that we're still
doing it.
We're still doing it. That was in 1973 when we were incorporated, to where we are today, where the landscape has significantly changed. We have far greater focus now on infill, density, apartments. So our representation and our agenda has shifted substantially to accommodate that. But yeah, look, I think our vision is to create great places for people to live, work, play, invest. And I think our members do an amazing job doing that, and they do that with the support of all of the inputs from planning, environment, engineering.
Well, that's your body, right?
Landscape,
you rock up at a UDIA event and you've got planners, development managers, people in the environmental and engineering spaces, hydro, all these guys come together, and it's a really cool melting pot of, you could form a development team.
Yes.
On a table of people sitting around having a coffee, right? If you go, all right, I want to build an apartment building, you could just look at one table and go, oh, I have all the people I need.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the point.
The culture within our membership is very collegiate. It's interesting to contrast how our membership operates and the culture within it with others, like a big family. Our members aren't combative. When it comes to business, obviously they look after their own interests, and anybody would expect them to do that. But in WA, we really are like a big family. Everyone knows everyone else, and you want to make sure that you don't burn any bridges.
But you look on LinkedIn, right, and it's pretty clear UDIA seems to have the most fun when it comes to the sundowners and things like that. It's probably the most collegiate industry body. There are bigger industry bodies, but it's probably the one that seems to bring the most diversity together in a social way as well, which is important in this industry, right? Because so often we can go through a whole project, talk to someone 20, 30 times on the phone and still not have a clue what they look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would, I've lost count at the amount of comments that have been made, that the number of business deals that are done in that context, in the sort of relaxed, more social networking environment, is significant. And because it's all about relationships. Humans are about connecting with others, and the way that we...
solving problems, right?
Yeah, exactly. Solving problems together. You can't do it alone. And I think that that's also one of the fundamental, pillars of how UDIA operates, is collaboratively and solutions focused. We can't solve the problems on our own, and we know that.
Well, let's segue into that. What are you guys focusing on at the moment? What do you think are the big key factors that help to solve the biggest problems in WA right now?
So for us, I guess we've got 4 key priority areas, and we deliberately try and limit our focus to 3 or 4 big chunky items, because you can't possibly have an effective impact when you've got your fingers in too many pies. The first one is around housing supply and affordability, and we have been working with the state government on how we can get a single source of truth on housing supply and affordability over sort of, the next 5 to 10 years in particular. So what does the development ready pipeline look like? Can we all get on the same page and understand what the true land supply looks like? And that's just within the confines of the MRS, the Metropolitan Region Scheme. So we're not talking about sprawl beyond that. We're talking about
within the current
framework, within the current sub-regional frameworks. How can we just agree how much?
Because that has to be a key point, right? In that, surely we're all in a space now where most of us agree we can't keep pushing those boundaries anymore.
Yep.
But there still has to be significant enough square meterage there for many years to come for land developers to be able to do their job and to continue to add supply. But also, surely, I'm guessing part of what you're moving towards there is a transition towards further focus on infill.
Absolutely. And so our greatest concern when you look at urban and urban deferred zoned land within Perth and Peel frameworks itself, 66% of that is bush forever, and that's urban deferred. So it can't be developed unless you want to change your bush forever.
Yeah, it's a false statistic.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. And 85% of the urban deferred land has some portion of a threatened ecological community in it.
Yep, that can hold up development stymie at 4 years. There's examples there where you might have an infill lot that might be a couple of hectares. Some old ladies held out for 30 years while everyone developed around it. Let's say it's Lansdale, right? And let's say there's one orchid that may or may not be there for, just generally in the area. Well, that might hold you up for a couple of years. I've seen examples in SAT where they've developed POS around what may have been an orchid, and then it turns out there was never an orchid there in the first place. These sort of things frustrate the hell out of land developers.
Absolutely. And so it sort of links back to, one of our other, 4 key priorities. So first of all, we need a single source of truth around supply, particularly over the sort of 10-year time frame. So
are we getting it?
I think we will. I think where UDIA itself is driving it, because you've got different government agencies that have their own data inputs into that impact forward supply, and the Urban Growth Monitor, which Department of Planning operate at the moment, its methodology is extremely limited. It doesn't take into account things like environmental constraints, land fragmentation, infrastructure constraints, all of these things, which mean that within the Urban Growth Monitor, they will say that we've got sufficient zoned land
but
to
it's
2050.
Totally misrepresented.
Yep. We're so far from that, and our concern is, you can look, just turn on the news, read the newspaper, you can already see the crisis that we're seeing in terms of housing supply.
Well, you talk to environmental and bushfire, for example. One of the biggest ones is that there's a lot of land out there still, but a lot of it's just not even accessible from a financial point of view. It would cost millions just to run a sewer down there, and given the fact that it's so far away, you'd then have to probably put 2-3 metres worth of fill in, retain the whole site, spend millions and millions more on that. You look at a place like Henley Brook. Henley Brook is, for everyone listening, just above Brabham, just below Ellenbrook. Now, that's an area that is prime for development. You've got Mirvac in there, you've got the Little Group in there, Progress Development's in there. A lot of that's already been taken up, but a lot of the blocks in there are totally constrained because, one, you got to get a sewer to it, and you can't get it through there unless the fella before you decides that he'll allow it through. And two, the millions that would have to be spent on just earthworks, civil works, retaining. Most of the land that I think they would say is available might be available, but from a financial point of view, from a commercial point of view, is probably 20 years away from being actually ready to go.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think that's where UDIA thinks that it has a role to play in applying the commercial lens to a planning framework, a public policy planning framework, because they're not developing the land. Our members are. And so that's where we want to bring that conversation together, overlay the commercial realities, the environmental constraints, the land ownership, fragmentation, infrastructure, to get that single source of truth. And linking that back to the environmental constraints, what we don't have at the moment is a strategic assessment that makes it very clear what is and is not going to be approved from an environmental perspective.
It is very subjective at the moment. I think WAPC holds all the cards. They refer out to the Department of Biodiversity, and then you sort of just got to hope that they're cool with it. And if they're not, well, you're stuffed.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest constraints that we have at the moment with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority, they've been hit like everyone else in terms of workforce shortages, and the number of approvals that are being run through the EPA, and not just from the development industry but the mining industry as well, is really significant.
We've also got the federal layer on top of it. Federal communities of biodiversity like your Banksia woodlands and those sort of things. If it's possible, this is how it works for everyone listening. If it's possible that there is a community on your piece of land that might be deemed significant, it must get referred to the federal agency, and it might take a year for them to get back to say, oh no, it's not significant, you can go ahead.
Yes, exactly. And so there's been a review at the federal level of the EPBC Act, which is basically the federal government's Environment Act that they use to make assessments about whether things should be approved for development or not. The idea behind the strategic assessment, or what we used to call SAPA for short, was that effectively the federal government, with a strategic assessment in place at a state level, will defer all of the decision making to the state. So that means that you're not going through two different agencies at different levels. You're going through the one. They have the authority to make the approvals at a state level based on a federal government endorsed strategic assessment.
That's positive.
That is what we've been pushing for years. We're at the point where we were very, very close. There was a lot of concerns around, I think there was a bit of scope creep about what that assessment would look like, who would fund it, etc. It's with DPC, Department of Premier and Cabinet at the moment. It was shelved when COVID came because, obviously health became the priority, as it should. We are now saying dust it off because, as we saw the Federal Environment Minister, Tanya Steinbeck, releasing the State of the Environment report, which was hidden by the previous government and not released, it's pretty dire. There are some dire things in there, and the implications for the development industry are significant.
It doesn't sound like it would be very helpful. Put it that way.
Well, look, it's for the development industry, it's about certainty. And so we do not have our heads in the sand around climate change. We fully accept
well, of course,
that's a massive issue.
I'm assuming what you're going to lead to is, look, there's a place you can develop land and there's a place you can't.
Yes.
Just tell us where they are.
Exactly. And so with certainty, we can all move forward and plan for the future appropriately. At the moment, we don't have that and haven't had it for quite some time. And in an environment when we're dealing with a new federal government that quite rightly has a far greater focus and agenda around climate change, that will translate into where we build residential homes in the future. We're looking at the impact of the flooding in the eastern states has already triggered reviews from a planning perspective about we can't repeat that mistake. We can't build in those places again. So what does that mean in terms of coastal planning policy, bushfire policy and other things? Floodplains, all these sorts of things.
You know what it means?
Deal.
It means more cost.
It does. It absolutely means more cost. And so for WA, we are so fortunate at the moment to be the most affordable place in the country. Perth is still the most affordable place, which is fantastic, but it could be very short-lived. It's inevitable that we will start to see price pressures.
Well, it has to be, right? In any asset class, the economics shows that where the replacement cost of an asset increases, the market for the established asset must increase with it as well. Otherwise, further supply won't come on. Now, talking to supply, we just got a new build contract in yesterday for a triplex in Melville that would have cost $630,000 3 years ago. Now $1 million.
Yeah.
So that obviously pushes into the established market of just trying to get infill going. And we're talking about a triplex here, Tanya.
Yeah.
So you extrapolate that out to what CoreLogic says is over half of the developments that are ready to move on an apartment level basis, multi-story sort of stuff, they've all been shelved. What is the solution here?
It is a wicked problem. A lot of our apartment developer members, depending on which market they operate, the higher end, more premium product that, say, Blackburns will develop, very much...
There's a bit of fat in it. They can still roll with it.
Yeah, it's the premium pricing and your market is, your downsize is very financially secure.
Less sensitive to price
risk,
rises.
right?
Yep.
It's far less risk. But when you get down to the affordable end, the margins aren't there with construction costs and labour constraints as they are.
Yeah.
They were so skinny to begin with. Layer on that the increasing requirement to include a social housing allocation in future apartment developments in certain areas.
Layer on that the fact that social housing isn't even delivering anyway, or hasn't done for the last 2-3 years what it should have been. The massive backlog that is there that creates big issues for just availability of construction workers competing against the private sector.
Yeah.
I really struggle to see any outcome, Tanya, in Western Australia that doesn't lead to huge price rises on all this stuff, just born out of the inflationary aspects of delivering both land and built form.
Yep. The chicken and the egg situation that we're in is that we need the workers to come here to build the houses, but we've got nowhere for them to live.
Exactly right.
And so how do you solve that? Well, I guess you can look at a quarantine facility in Bullsbrook and say you can go put them out there for 6 months. That's fine, but it's a Band-Aid and it's a short-term solution. Coming back to, I guess, my history in the government is that you cannot just pull one lever without it impacting another component of housing supply along the continuum. You can't just focus on public housing at the detriment of affordable housing or private rental or other areas because you will distort the market.
Yes.
And so what we need is a systemic approach to housing supply to make sure that from crisis accommodation to home ownership, we're addressing the various constraints to supply across the whole continuum at the same time, not when the greatest crisis is occurring.
And I want to get to the other 3 points of your 4 points that you guys focus on. But first, I want to segue quickly into red tape. A big part of delivering, generally delivering supply that's commercial and ready to go, it's profitable, we could deliver it, is simply how hard it is these days to get anything through local governments. It just seems in the last 5 to 10 years, but especially the last 5, that councillors have become far more political and far more involved in planning situations with minimal qualifications to actually make these decisions. And it's become very much now to the detriment of supply. It's become a real problem in a red tape situation, and no further exemplified than the city of Perth voting to refuse the Rua move on John Street down the road from this existing facility. This is where anyone should be able to step in and go, are you serious, fella? The Children's Hospice in Nedlands. Are you serious? Who is voting for these people? But the reality is these guys are decision makers, and it takes then someone like Rita Safiotti to take time out of her day to go, yep, these guys are idiots. We'll come over the top here and deliver this because from a state perspective, it's important. It shouldn't have to get to that, Tanya.
No, it absolutely shouldn't. And I wrote about this last week in the West Australian. I can't tell you how much flack I copped for that piece from local government representatives.
Well, of course.
As I expected. But I think from UDIA's perspective, our second priority is building a collaborative regulatory culture.
Well, tell you what.
And at the moment, we are very, very far from achieving that.
It's getting worse every year, Tanya.
It is, and it is frustrating. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. But at the end of the day, this is why it hasn't changed, is because it's hard. It comes down to leadership and cultural change, and that is why it's so difficult and it takes a long time and we're not seeing quick wins. So from our perspective, the Minister for Planning has been, I think, one of the greatest leaders in this space that we have seen.
Extremely courageous, very brave.
Agree.
A high-performing female in a male-dominated industry, and she has absolutely done the right thing in so many places where a lot of people would never have had the bravery to step over the mark, create the SDAU, step on Nedlanders to say, nope, this is the policy you're going to have if you can't decide for yourselves. This is leadership.
Oh, it is. And I think from my perspective, inevitably this current government is going to be in for at least another one, maybe 2 terms.
Probably a decade at least.
You know, so we have...
The change she could make.
Oh, exactly. And I guess this is a very, very rare occurrence in that you don't often have consistency at a state government level for such a long period of time. And the systemic change within the public sector, including local and state, is desperately needed, but it needs longevity, it needs consistency, and it needs strong leadership. And I think that we have that in the state government space. The challenge and the opportunity is for us to work more collaboratively with our local government partners to make sure that we are delivering what needs to be delivered for the community to benefit rather than specific interest groups.
I reckon 10 years ago, Colin Barnett tried to amalgamate these local governments. And I'd think about where we would be today if that happened.
I do too. I think a lot of people do. Yeah. I think this current government have stayed away from that and probably quite rightly too. But I think that's why you will see greater state government intervention in planning decisions, because it's not happening the way it should happen in some areas. We've got some fantastic local government authorities out there. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of really good ones. A lot of really good ones.
It's that, you normally talk about, it's the minority. It's probably not, though. A minority of local governments that are letting, I think, the community down, in that there's probably half of the local governments that are doing a really good job and half of the local governments that are really letting a lot of people down from a city and a council perspective. And we're not here to name names, but that's the problem, is when it gets that far into stymieing, what is one of the most important basic needs of all of us, housing, someone needs to step in. And the minister has done, I think, all she can, but we probably need another 5 times that amount of involvement to be able to rationalise the processes of delivering the most chronic issue we now have, which from one basis, it leads to the massive homelessness issue we have, and from the other, on the other side of the spectrum, leads to what will become an affordability issue. People complain about how unaffordable it is now. Sorry, guys, we are the most affordable state in the country. I don't think there's a perspective really that appreciates how Sydney-like it could get. And the way that people in Sydney who make the same income as us, by the way, living right now, you see all the stuff coming out of the AFR. Christopher Joy always talking about how it's doomsday in Australia, but really over there, when it comes to disposable income and how hard it is for people to afford interest rate rises. We're lucky. We hear it, creates a bit of confusion, but it doesn't really affect us anywhere near to the level that it does over there when you've got 3 times the mortgage that we do. That's when you're in a big problem, right?
Yep.
That's where you're going in Perth if you can't sort this out. You're in the same position as Sydney, where it takes 2-3 years on average to get an apartment development approved. We're going that way. And it takes people as influential as yourself, for example, Tanya, to have those pipeline discussions with someone as influential as Rita Saffioti. Otherwise, nothing happens.
No, it doesn't. And I think there's a fundamental shift that I think we're on the precipice of, which is considering housing as essential infrastructure. We've never done that. It's always been considered an investment, a tax benefit, capital gains, all of these sorts of...
A profit-making scheme.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's a wealth creation mechanism.
But it's not just that, is it?
No, it's multifactorial. There's
That's
so
right.
many different...
You worked in the Department of Communities.
I know exactly what it's like.
It is a social need.
It is a social need and it is essential infrastructure. Everybody needs a roof over their head. Unfortunately, in Australia, for a whole range of reasons, we've got to the point where this morning, listening to the radio after the latest census, there's 1 million vacant houses on census night with the homelessness rates that we have.
You solve that overnight, don't you?
Well, interestingly, these are the Airbnbs, these are the holiday homes, these are the investments that are not tenanted. It is just a moral disaster that we have that level of vacancy and under-occupation in our housing system.
What do you do? Do you tax Airbnbs? Is that what how you get them to maybe think about putting it back into the rental market?
Well, I think we need to look at all the options.
It's a pretty profitable system, and that's why people do Airbnb, because overall, especially down in the holiday areas, it becomes extremely profitable for these. But these are areas that have minimal supply in the first place.
Exactly. So I think I've covered 3 of them. So the first one was the single source of truth on housing supply and how much we actually have. The second was building a collaborative regulatory culture with state and local government, we just spoke about. The third was the need for a strategic environmental assessment so we know what we can and can't develop. And the last one is really around getting a considered approach around delivery of infrastructure to unlock housing supply. And this is not about MetroNet. This is not about Infrastructure WA's state infrastructure strategy, whilst I think that when it gets there, we'll have an influence over how we develop residential land in the future. It's about understanding what the lead infrastructure requirements are to open up housing supply. So there's lead and lag infrastructure, and the lag infrastructure is things like waiting until you've got the freeway clogged up for kilometres before you add an extra lane, right? I mean, that's lag. That's coming in at the last minute and fixing a problem. What we're talking about is if we had that sewer connection, if we had that whatever piece of power or water infrastructure it was, we would unlock X number of residential properties over the next 5 years. That is what we need. That's where we need to be.
I have a massive smile on my face, you can see, Tanya, right? Because this is something I was thinking about only yesterday, driving down the freeway, looking at public infrastructure, for example, where transformers are. Every day I'm looking at sewer maps to understand what is, again, actually available land to be developing in an infill space. And you're 100% right. The pipeline of supply that would open up if the state government was proactive in their supply of infrastructure with regards to pretty much just sewer, water and power supply in these areas, and then just charge the developer back at a rate to remunerate that rather than the other way around. Holy moly.
Yeah.
It would open up so much opportunity within the existing confines of our city straight away. And the last piece of the puzzle I think I want to talk to you about is POS. And this is starting to get to a point where it is ridiculous. And it's on both sides of the spectrum. The first one is for the little guy doing a triplex in Stirling. We're supposed to be incentivized to provide urban infill at this low mum and dad level. And the policy allows, essentially settles on a state government level, that for more than 5 properties that are being subdivided on a lot, POS should be involved. If you have a POS strategy as a city, you can charge it from a triplex and above. Now, a place like the City of Stirling does that for 3 and above. The City of Canning's got a draft one for a triplex and above. Bassendean, a quad and above. And what it essentially does is justifies their ability for essentially a money grab. A developer might put up his life savings, and mum and dad put up $300,000 to buy a block of land and develop that block into 3 units or 3 townhouses. He'll have a big loan of $1.5 million on top of that, and he might make $200,000 if he's lucky, $250,000 in a flat market. You put POS in that, and you then ask the developer to pay $80,000 of that $200,000 back to the council as a money grab for absolutely no value back, because they're not about to go and buy land with that money, or who knows where it goes back into the general reserve essentially. Now what that does is it makes the project uneconomic, all for a money grab. So that's the lower level. POS literally either stops people doing development at all, or gets people to underdevelop and just do a duplex where it had the capacity to do a triplex so they can avoid POS. It's ridiculous. No one seems to be worrying about that. And on the top end, you now see a lot of the western suburbs local governments stepping in and retrospectively on an occupancy certificate stage, now starting to money grab 10% of the land value of a $2 million block when a developer has gone and done his feasibility, got his approvals, built the place, maybe made a buck delivering urban infill, and then been asked, sorry, you can't get the keys until you give us $200,000. It is insane, Tanya. This level of money grab from local governments, where it seems they've all got around in a room together on a Friday night over some beers and thought, how do we get some money because we need more money? And it all seems to be happening under the nose of the state government. Because I don't think if the state government saw this, they would think it lined up very well with incentivising urban infill.
First of all, we agree with you. It is outrageous the way that it's been handled to date. The good thing is that the state government are onto it. This is something that not just UDIA but Property Council as well, we've been pushing very hard against the way POS contributions have been managed at a local government level, particularly for the apartment developers.
They've been hijacked.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been assured that there are strategies being put in place to stop that from happening, or at the very least stop that from happening at the death knell and stop basically holding developers ransom for the handover and release to the owners.
All it does either way is add cost to the end buyer. If it's been put in at the start and it's a condition of subdivision, all it will still do is add cost, because a development won't go to market unless it stacks up, and it can't stack up unless that cost gets passed on to the end consumer. So all this is doing is transferring money from the end consumer, the downsizer, who we're supposed to be incentivizing into these properties, back to the local government, who don't need the money in the first place. It's unconscionable from my perspective, right? But it seems to be an acceptable outcome when we all recognise that POS was brought into our framework for the peats, the stocklands, the saddleys, to make sure that when they developed a 100-hectare estate, there was enough space for parks and rec. It wasn't to be a money grab for local governments in urban infill.
No, and I think the other consideration is the introduction of the medium density design code, which is imminent. There's a huge focus within that code which will hit your clientele, the mum and dads, the people that want to, develop the triplex sites and things like that, hard.
Well, it makes it nearly impossible to develop a triplex anymore, and those people won't be able to afford to do the class 2 style outcome that the medium density code is looking for, right?
Yeah, it's going to make it difficult. And so from our perspective, we always try and advocate for balance. You have to be able to balance the environmental agenda around greater urban tree canopies, because we all want the tree-lined streets.
Exactly,
we all want beautiful streetscapes. We all want that sort of environment to live and recreate in. The issue that I often find in my experience is it's easier at a policy level to apply a one-size-fits-all solution. You cannot apply a one-size-fits-all solution to greenfields and infill. It doesn't work. And so what we've been working with the state government as part of the medium density code is to say, there are different considerations between developing in a greenfields context and developing in an infill context. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach.
That's exactly right.
And so
the
POS is a classic.
Yeah,
POS is a classic example of where, given the opportunity, key stakeholders are going to apply elements that are meant to apply to an infill context to any context they like, and vice versa. So we just need to make sure that the policy is fit for purpose for the different types of development, and if that means it's slightly more complex or complicated, or there's a different code for different...
Well, there should be.
Well,
there 100% should be a code for developing infill, which should be incentivized, and there should be a code for urban expansion, which should slowly be disincentivized, because it's not good for this state. It's not a good thing that we are the most sparsely populated city in the world. Being an outlier is not a good thing in that space, right?
Yeah, well, and again, I would respond to that in saying it's about balance, because you have to bring in the commercial realities and the housing affordability pressures into consideration with greenfields versus infill, because the reality is, for a lot of people, they cannot afford to buy in a lot of the infill areas. They just can't.
100%.
And so for our first home buyers in particular, they will radiate to the outskirts, because that's where it's cheapest to develop. That's where, it's cheapest to buy a home. And so until those market dynamics start to shift, you'll continue to see people gravitate towards the outskirts.
Exactly.
Because it is just cheaper and more affordable.
But I think the broader strategy is that it should be a transition. There should be a slow transition towards eventually, we're a 150-year-old market, right? London's a 400-year-old market. Within the next 50 to 100 years, we're in a space where there really is no expansion anymore, and everything is about how we're doing urban infill in the best way.
Yep.
We're not there anywhere near that yet, right? But it should always be, the point I'm trying to make is there should be far more incentives in the urban infill space, given the fact it is so much harder in the first place to get up.
Yes, and I would agree with you. I think we accept that you can't continue to develop forever. I mean, the Perth metro area is confined by the Metropolitan Region scheme. I don't see it sort of getting any further than that. There's no intention to do that, and we get that. But, as you say, we need to be able to deliver supply in an infill context much, much quicker, because the advantage in a greenfields area is we can respond and dial up our response to demand
a lot quicker.
Very quickly.
Yep.
If we have a spike in demand and all of that land is gone, so in 6...
You can't do it with urban infill.
Well, so 6 years, no more master plan communities. Cannot respond to any spikes in demand with that type of product because there's none left.
Do you not think, though, that if there was a framework that allowed for that demand to be responded to by apartment developments on a broader scale, which is where we should be going, a lot more 200 lot apartments in local townships, what would be wrong with there being a 15, 20 story apartment development on Bayswater train station, for example?
Absolutely nothing.
Why hasn't the zoning been allowed for it? These are the questions that I think need to be asked, right? Instead, we zone it for a 6-level apartment building that's going to be there for the next 70 years. And this is, I think, there's no forward thinking in regards to where we're actually supposed to be going within our development framework, right? It's a 20-year policy that keeps people happy for now, but really we're going to get to a point where we're looking around going, well, we've got a number of sort of median density outcomes here, but we really need high density, but there's absolutely nowhere to do it.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the need for greater vision over what the future of our city looks like.
Bravery, right? And that's the thing. For some reason, the Perth market has this issue with, for example, height. But the only way that you can actually fix the landscaping issue, getting that green canopy, is height. But if you're going to restrict height, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? And that's where I think we're really struggling at the moment.
Yeah, look, I would agree with you. And, our offices are in Subiaco. I spent a lot of time in Subi. And, you walk through the Subi Centro precinct and go, geez, we really undercooked this, didn't we? And, you look at Blackburn's One Subiaco, which is really taking shape now. Looks fantastic. Great location.
It shouldn't be on its own, though.
It shouldn't. And then you see the transition now to the Subi Oval redevelopment, which is taking that into consideration, will have far greater density around it. And that's what I think the general community need to understand, that what we are developing today is not for you. No. It's not for you. It's for your grandchildren and their children. Yep. That's the challenge is, we've got to bring everyone along on that journey.
Tanya, it's the longest podcast we've actually ever done.
But wow. Okay, I can talk.
No, it's been so engaging, and I really hope that the minister, for example, is listening to this one. She's obviously been on the podcast a while ago. I really hope she's listening to this one because there's so many problems that have all been brought up in this last hour, and hopefully everyone listening has got a lot out of your journey. Especially a lot of people that can look up to you and go, well, I can be her one day. But also just a lot of people out there who get a little bit of comfort to know that there is a body who's actually trying to fix this. And hopefully throughout all this chaos, there are opportunities for everyone.
Yeah, no, agree. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!